Good evening and welcome to another episode, if that's the right word, of the Mirador Television Round Table. And tonight there are four of us, so it's square again. I've had a dilemma all week. Should I have Atlantic lobster or should I have Pacific lobster from the United States? Because I don't know which one has been treated. Perhaps both of them have, perhaps neither of them have. But a big issue this past week, during the to and fro of every other crisis that seems to hit the world, was should we import or allow to be imported various produce from the United States which goes through the sort of treatment that we don't give it here. And it seems to have raised huge passions. It always does. So let me go now to our panel. Mark Brett Warburton in Guildford, Annie Verrill in Lewis, and Melissa Conti in New York. 3-1, Melissa. So I'm afraid you're going to have to take the battering that the chickens seem to take. And the main food that seems to be under the microscope is the poor old Chucky Chuck. Nobody wants to buy it. Everybody, excuse me, if I see my knuckles, everybody is afraid of it. The arguments rage backwards and forwards, is it safe? Well, I suppose, Mark, I'm going to come to you first, because I suppose in a little sort of way, you may get involved as a politician in deciding whether we shall have it or whether we shan't. I'm sure that decision isn't going to rest solely on your shoulders, but what's the feedback that you're getting?
The feedback? I think a lot of people are very confused about what's actually involved. The reality is it's not so much about the chlorine in the water that's used to flush down the chickens or chicken carcasses, which is what people assume it's about. They assume it's the chlorine in the water that's the issue. That's it's not. It's about the different type of regime that is used for hygiene in the processing plants between the US and the UK. And that's effectively what we're talking about. It's a different approach to the processing of foodstuffs. It's nothing to do with the actual chlorine in itself. And the argument is that the chlorine allows a more lax regime within the processing plants in the States compared to the European approach, which is to take out that ability to use chlorinated water to kill off the bugs on the carcasses and use the actual process. So you don't allow anything into that chain. You have to be much cleaner all the way through, and that's the fundamental argument. It's a different approach. For instance, I think in Europe we allowed chickens to be transported live for 12 hours at a stint. In the States, it's 28 hours, which allows more disease to be created, but they rely on using these systems to clean down the carcass afterwards. It should also be noted, I think I've read that only 10% of American food processing plants are using chlorinated water anyway. So it's actually a very, very small proportion of the plants using this in the States, and it's therefore quite a small risk for ourselves. Whether we should label the food is a different matter, and that's part of the argument as well, from what I can understand, is that the American trade side don't want to be prejudiced by having a label saying "Made in America" or "chlorinated chicken" on the outside of the packaging, which I think is actually the approach that would be the fairest way of dealing with it, so that people can look at it, educate them, and let them make their own choice. And
I can see Melissa is nodding there. I'll go to her in a minute. But you know, these things get out of hand because you start to read about the monster foods and doom-laden imports and all the rest of it. I mean, how much what you've done is you've given a very articulate outline of what the real situation is. But people don't read packaging; they get all fluttery like the chickens, and emotion enters into it. Now, once again, you must be very sensitive as a politician to human responses. So, apart from the logical viewpoint, how are you feeling the feedback from the public in terms of emotion?
From the people that I've heard from, I think that people are just genuinely confused. They've been wound up by the press, and they haven't really got the full story of what's going on. I mean, when you think about it, in reality, we have chlorinated water in our taps. And I believe, and I can't remember where I've seen this, so I might be wrong, but I believe we actually get vegetables coming from Europe that have been flushed down with chlorinated water. So it's more to do with the use of chlorinated water for animal carcasses, where I think they see there being a greater risk. The Americans have countered with a claim that I think they say once they've flushed down their chicken carcasses with chlorinated water, they have 2% salmonella, or traces of salmonella on the surface, compared to European chickens, which have 15 to 20%. But I don't really know about how that testing is done, because I think there are equal claims that the chlorinated water disguises the amount of bacteria on the surface of the meat.
Right. Now, Churchill famously said, "Some chicken, some neck." So, Melissa, what's the view on the chicken neck from New York?
Your objection over there almost seems to be ideological. It's not so much the chlorine in terms of it being safe or not, because as you mentioned, your water is chlorinated. It almost seems it's our farming practices you object to. I mean, it's understandable. Chickens, in particular chickens, they're fed enormous amounts of feed. They become very heavy and they literally cannot move. They're stuffed into a coop with their own feces, and it's the treatment that perhaps some may object to. So maybe they disguise it as, oh, well, you chlorinate your chicken. So you buy it, you wash it. If there's salmonella, you cook it, it's gone. But it seems more ideological and more of a concern that if you start now with chlorinated chicken, other foodstuffs are going to come onto your market where we have our food dyes and we have a lot of preservatives you all do not use. So I think it's also not just about the chickens. I think it's an ideology. It's the objection because in the United States, I mean, I'm just going to break it down simply. We have a lot of people and a lot of people to feed, far more than you do. So our practices are different because we need more mass production. And Americans eat a lot. Sorry.
Are those practices accepted by your population?
Not necessarily, no. There is a segment of our population that they don't eat meat. They don't want anything to do with the industry. So especially when they come out with videos of cows being brutalized, calves being torn from the cows. And so it does get people upset. And then what ends up happening in the case of the cow and the milk in particular is people will boycott that particular brand of milk because there was a video on animal abuse. So that's oftentimes when the objections come about.
Are we going to get chicken in your house, Annie?
Yes. Breaded chicken, very good. I'm not that worried about chlorinated chicken. I'm more worried about the antibiotics the animals are fed with or injected with. It does go down to the farming practices If you keep your animals in decent conditions, you will not need to wash it down with chlorine, and you will also not need to inject it with antibiotics. So I, for one, I try and make sure I buy free-range chicken. Whenever, and eggs as well. If I see caged eggs from caged hens, I won't buy it. I don't agree with those practices. And yes, Mark, you are right. Even the salad is washed down with chlorine before it's sold to us. So, and there is chlorine in the water, in the tap water. There's chlorine in the swimming pools when you go swimming. So
Well,
I don't think it's
the
such a big issue, to be honest.
issue of chlorine itself is the red herring, because I think even by the EU, I don't know which body, whether it's the agricultural body or the health body, have said that they don't see the actual chlorine element of chlorinated chicken being a concern. I think you have to eat 5% of your own body weight at any one time for it to be having some sort of effect on your body. So the chlorinated element it's a red herring. It's purely to do with farming practices.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the other statistic I saw, the UK, I think the likelihood of having some sort of food illness, food-related illness, food poisoning, is 1.5 in 100. In the States, it's 11.4 in 100, so it's about 7 times the number. But that's not necessarily associated with the chicken we're talking about. That might be to do with other types of food as well and other food practices. So, it's a big country, and they're shifting food around. There are other practices which we don't know, which may not be anything to do with import of American foods into the UK. So
Eddie, Mark made reference earlier to the fact that packaging would have instructions on it and so on and so forth. Now, you really, on this program, represent the housewife, and you said, I look at free-range chicken and so on, but how carefully do you read packaging when you go to the supermarket?
Not that carefully, I have to say. I just check the main. If it's free range or organic, then it's fine. If it's anything to do with cage, but then again, you can see that from the size of it too. If the price is £2.50, it's not the best, and it's going to be a lot smaller too, and the taste is not going to be the same either. You need a good, well, I want to say yellowish color to a well-bred chicken. So, and incidentally, I've also read that a UK university did a test. Basically, they found that chlorine masks the bacteria. So when you check it in a lab, let's say, it will mask the appearance of listeria and salmonella. And it's not going to kill it, basically. That's still there. And apparently, that's the reason why in the US there are more cases of food poisoning than in the UK. That's to do with these two, with listeria and salmonella. But then again, it could be because obviously the population in the US is...
You know, with a well-dressed chicken going out with a hand-raised pork pie, I can see that we can get a real comedy going here. But Melissa, I'd like to come back to really public perception, because I remember that you and I doing a program way back when we were opposite ends of the Atlantic with a daily program. And in one video, we had a calf being led away to slaughter because of hoof and mouth, and it actually had a tear in its eye. And that little clip caused havoc. You got all sorts of calls from people saying, that poor cow being led away and it was crying and so on and so forth. How much does really public perception and the feeling for animals come into our choice of what we eat?
I think it's huge. Although I mean, listen, if someone wants a steak, they really don't care. They're just going to deal with it. And a lot of times, because we're so removed from our food, we really don't know where it comes from and you know what goes into it. So we just know it's a big steak on our plate. We don't really care about, or we don't want to necessarily think about the process and what goes on. So it is, when you do see videos like that, that it does come to light. And it just, and I think that people in general, certainly here in the United States, have gotten away from the consumption of red meat mainly for health reasons, because of the high levels of cholesterol. But quite frankly, chicken has a high level of cholesterol as well. So, you know, not necessarily getting the health benefits, but it's been marketed very well. It is light meat. It's cleaner than meat. It's fresher, and you know, it's healthier. When maybe it's not necessarily healthier.
Yeah, you see, in this country, people will say, "Oh, it's spring. Look at the little lambs frolicking in the fields, and isn't it dreadful that they're going to be taken away from their mothers and sent to a slaughterhouse?" And then they sit down and what's one of the favorite Sunday lunches? Roast lamb. Now, I understand that it's very difficult to get veal in the United States because of the popular feeling that they don't want to see the little cows pulled away from their mothers. I mean, it seems to me that we are full of emotion, but in your case, you do what you say, and in our case, we say, sod the little lambs frisking around. Let's have a decent Sunday lunch. Annie, what do you say to that?
No. I don't admit to anything. I don't like lamb, so I'm fine.
So you go out and watch the.
But you do paint a horrible picture, I have to say.
I do. It's a very. I lived on a farm in Northern Ireland, and the farmer had 150 sheep, and he could name 130 of them. He'd given them names, and he could name 130 of them. But the economy said he shuffled them off to market once every so often. But he could not eat his own sheep. He couldn't have lamb on his farm. Now, you know, it's funny how all these emotions get mixed up. But the fact of the matter is, when you're talking about economy, and I mean, you know, Melissa is an economist or part economist, and Mark deals in the economy as a politician, is we get terribly confused between what is a frilly little lamb and what the economy needs. And I just wonder, what I'm trying to get at is, what sort of impact do you think that really has on what we eat and what we sell? Anybody?
I just wanted to say I'm a student of the economy rather than an economist. But thank you very much.
If you want any more, I mean, nobody knows you're a Contessa.
Yes.
Going back to your question, I think that I've come across more people stepping away from meat, not totally, but eating less, and not necessarily because of the fuzzy, cuddly image of animals, but maybe a reassessment of the effect for health. I think that's a bigger effect, where people are looking to change their diet. It makes them feel better to have a vegetarian diet. And when they start going down that route, they probably start to reassess the impact for the animals as a secondary consequence. And then maybe they start to think about that as well. That it snowballs from there.
Well, a very amusing side to that is some old colleagues of mine live in the north, and there is a statue in one town or another to Desperate Dan, who was the hero of a comic. I don't know whether it's the Beano or the Dandy, but Desperate Dan was always eating pies, and the cow's hoofs would stick out of the top of the pie. And apparently it is real now that the people in the town where this statue is are worried that the protesters are going to decide to go and rip down Desperate Dan because he ate cow's pie. But you know, I mean, it is so much emotion gets involved in these things that one wonders how we can keep some sort of sensible lid on the whole thing, and that's why I really do appreciate the fact that we've had some very sensible views tonight based on reality, whether it's going shopping at the supermarket, whether it's the background to the chemicals and so on and so forth, or the economy, as you know, as Melissa says, if it's not mass produced, they don't get it. Now, I see from the little clock ticking around, I always think when we start off with the first minute to go, how the hell are we going to keep talking for 20 minutes? Well, we have. So we've only got a couple of minutes left. So as we usually do, I'm going to go around the table, the square table, which is a round table, and ask for one last comment. Melissa?
Well, I'm just to Mark's point, I think that, you know, yes, definitely fewer people are consuming meat. There is a health effect. Here in the United States, a good majority of people over 55 are on statins and blood pressure medication and are looking to better health. So they go more toward a vegetarian, a plant-based diet, where it does definitely change your numbers, where you won't have to take a statin or blood pressure medication. So there's a lot of incentive not to, but people still enjoy their meats on occasion.
Mark?
Labeling, I think, is the thing that's on my mind. I think I'm quite happy for the trade to continue, but I think the answer is for everything to be labeled so people can make the choice. And that comes back to what exactly the Americans are asking us to do, which is to give a free market and then let the market decide. If they want the product that they're producing, people will buy it. If they don't, then the consumers will determine where they want to put their money. And American farmers can either change their production process, or the consumers will lap it up. I don't know which.
Annie?
I think the consumers will decide, won't they, really? So that's in a
Consumer
nutshell.
power. Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, you
Always
could.
is.
Oh, I'm sorry, Annie, go ahead.
No, always is. That's all. It's always consumer power.
I was just going to say they can. It could certainly end up where you may have the U.S. farmer selling to the U.K. and it won't be chlorinated, or it might have a higher standard.
I can easily see production in the States shifting to a form that would be more acceptable and more attractive if the European markets opened up. So while they might have one offer for the local market, they may have something totally different. Certain farms may be targeting the UK. It's fine. Open up the discussion, label it, and let everybody decide.
Well, according to the MP of Lewis, chlorinated chicken will not be allowed in the UK. That's what I read.
Well, I have to say that for a panel that was a bit puzzled and wondered whether they have anything to say, shutting you up this evening is difficult, and we have run out of time. So let me say about healthy eating and a healthy way of living is, I'm 80, and as long as you actually have plenty of alcohol, a dozen or so oysters a week, and lobster on the menu at least once in a while, you'll live a good and healthy life, and to hell with chlorination. My big disappointment is that the panel tonight could not tell me whether the Pacific lobster or the Atlantic lobster was likely to be the healthier. Till next week, Keith Hayes, and on behalf of the panel, ta-ra.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.